One interesting debate that I've had to deal with in the past is the argument that if salvation is eternal and the Calvinistic doctrine of the perseverance of the saints and the Arminian doctrine of eternal security, and there is a distinction between the two, and if you don't know the distinction between the two, then you don't understand the controversy. But if salvation is supposedly something that once it takes place, it's permanent, and it's something that isn't canceled, and so if you're really saved, you can't be unsaved, then saved and unsaved, like a yo-yo. I call it the yo-yo view, where now you're saved, now you're not, but the yo-yo walk the dog and up it comes. Is this question: if salvation is eternal and permanent, why is the New Testament full of all of these warnings if you continue in the faith, if you continue to believe, and also warnings, particularly in the book of Hebrews and others, of the possibility of damnation? This seemed a bit odd to find threats and warnings in the New Testament telling that Christians may well die and go to hell. This is a very good question, and I've had to deal with it in several debates. And the basic error is this: the authors of the New Testament wrote their books to professing Christians because that is all they could write to. They did not have a secret pair of X-ray glasses. Oh, this professing Christian is really saved. This one over here is really saved. They knew that in professing Christians, those who professed and said, Lord, Lord, there would be those that Christ would say, I never knew you. Never knew you. Not I once knew you and then didn't know you, and come back and forth. The New Testament is written to professing Christians. Now comes the point. Professing Christians, this is what Reformation theology teaches. Professing Christians can and do fall away from the faith, stop believing, or through immorality and heresy no longer continue in the Christian way, and they end up in hell. Reformed people believe professing Christians can and do fall away. That's not a controversy. Just because someone says I'm saved doesn't mean that they are. Matter of fact, 1 John 2 verse 19 says they left us because they didn't really belong here to begin with, but their leaving revealed they didn't belong here. If they would have truly belonged here, says the apostle of love, they would have persevered with us, but they left that it might be revealed they never belonged here to begin with. The book of Hebrews is addressing professing Christians who were tempted to go back to Judaism, renounce Jesus as the Messiah, and go back in the temple and begin to do animal sacrifices. So when an Arminian quotes the threats and the warnings directed to professing Christians, the Reformed person says, fine, I believe in that. When I'm preaching to the congregation, I've done it many times. Many of you seated here this morning will end up in hell because you're not really a believer. You're not truly regenerate. You're here because your parents brought you here, your grandmother's here, your aunt paid for the stained glass window, the chicks were good. You're here because there's good-looking girls in the youth group. There are 1,000 reasons why people are sitting in an evangelical church that have nothing to do with salvation. Better understand that. People are there because they married into it. What a business. They felt it was good for business. They're a funeral director. I'm going to join the biggest evangelical church, and I'll get the business for the funeral home. Oh, Dr. Bob. Yes, they've confessed it to me. They joined the biggest church in town to get the business. And if you don't understand the real world in which we live, that people do things like that, then you're very naive and you need to wake up and start reading the Bible. There are many people who claim to believe, they're professing Christians, and I say to them, you better start possessing, not just professing, or you're going to end up in hell. So professing Christians do end up in hell. Professing Christians can deny the faith. I have friends who were in seminary with me. Some of them fell away because they got involved in immorality, sleeping with the church secretary, or they were the youth pastor and they slept with the youth. And they no longer go to any church. They lost their family. I know one preacher up in Grand Rapids, it was discovered he was every year that he went to a whorehouse in Havana, Cuba. Spent 2 weeks in the whorehouse. Well, it ended up he lost his church, he lost his family, he lost his faith. Or through heresy. They came to believe in conditionalism, soul sleep, annihilationism, or some other heresy, or preterism. They ended up denying that we're justified by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, and they got involved in some work salvation scheme. So I have no problem when someone says, well, what about the warnings and threats of the New Testament? They're made to the visible church, to the people who gathered. It's no big deal. Professing Christians do fall away. So if you're worried about the fact that the New Testament warns professing Christians they can go to hell, this is what Reformed theology teaches. Yes, just because you profess to be a Christian does not mean you really are. Jesus will say, I never knew you, and you will end up in the fires of hell. So make sure you understand the authors of the New Testament were dealing with professing Christians, and if you're professing and you don't keep up professing, well, of course you'll be damned and end up in eternal perdition.